just looked at come from this book, which you're welcome to look at when we're done. It's called Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Lao Tzu, The Parallel Sayings, edited and with an introduction by Richard Cooper. I tried for 12 years to be a podium speaker, and I'm giving up the ghost. I'm admitting my deficits this morning. I'd like this to be an interactive experience, so if any of you would like to interject, offer, question, challenge, throw spoiled fruit, please feel free to do so. I heard a story this week about a bagpipe player. And it's unusual for me to like a story about a bagpipe player because I think bagpipes sound like animals being slaughtered. But that's me. When it's done well, it's very good. When it's not done well, it's very painful. Anyway, this bagpipe player was contacted by a minister in the town where he lived. And the minister related a story to him about a man who had died in the town that was indigent and had no family, no friends. They couldn't find any relatives for him anywhere. And the pastor had agreed that he would perform a ceremony for this man, and he would be buried in the potter's field some distance outside of town. And he was concerned, the pastor was, that he would be the only person there. And he thought that this man had probably suffered and struggled a great deal in his life, so it would be nice if he could have some nice bagpipe music at his funeral. And so he contacted the bagpipe player, who readily agreed. He said, "This is going to be a wonderful thing that I can do and that I can offer to this person just because he lived." And the pastor said, "I'm willing to pay you out of my pocket," and the bagpipe player wouldn't hear a word of it. He said, "Nope, this is my gift." Well, the bagpipe player was a little unfamiliar with where this potter's field was, and as he drove to where he thought it was, he became lost. And he frantically searched and asked for some directions, and finally he went down a narrow country road, and he came to a place where he saw a bunch of workmen and some excavating equipment and a fresh pile of dirt. But by now he was almost an hour late from the time that the funeral was supposed to happen. He assumed that the pastor had returned to his home. He said to himself, "I don't care. I've come here to offer music for this man, and that's what I'm going to do." So as he walked over to where the fresh pile of dirt was, he noticed that the vault had already been closed. And he said, "It doesn't matter. I'm going to do this." And as he started to play, he played from this place deep within his heart, and it was the most beautiful music in the world. And the workers, one by one, came over and stood by the graveside. And as the bagpipe player started Amazing Grace, they all had tears streaming down their cheeks. And he played with all his heart and his soul, and when he finished, he silently packed his things up and walked to the car, and one of the workers said, "You know, that's the most amazing thing I've ever seen or heard in my more than 30 years of installing septic tanks." And so sometimes we have certain presuppositions about what we're doing or what we're thinking or what we're believing that maybe aren't really so accurate. And sometimes, most especially, there seems to be something about human nature that leads us to a place where we believe that we have it all right. And everybody else who doesn't see things exactly as we do has to be wrong. Did you ever notice, at least in my experience, and maybe you've met someone like this, but you hardly ever run across somebody who thinks that there is somebody who has everything right, and it's not them. It's always about me, and it's always about our preconceived notions. So it doesn't much matter what spiritual tradition we grew up in, or whether we grew up in one at all. It doesn't much matter what we changed to when we went through that period in our 20s where we started to look at things and say, well, do I believe what my family did? Do I believe something else? It doesn't much matter what happens usually in our 40s when we start to question the relevance of all of that stuff we believed before. We tend to believe that we've been exposed to a really unique presentation of spiritual truth. And what's really strange about that, and a little bit inconsistent consistent with the rest of human experience is that spirituality is the one area where we don't believe that skills transfer. What I mean is this. Suppose you're in high school and you discover that you run really fast and really well. Well, you might decide to join the track team. You might decide to play football or basketball. You might decide to play baseball or softball. You might decide to do any number of things that you know you'll be good at because you can run fast. You recognize the different places where you can apply the truths about yourself. But when we come to spirituality, we say, nope, it's just here. Nobody else sees it the way we do. And one of the really nice things for me about this book is it shows those commonalities. The first grouping of readings, of course, were from the broader Christian tradition. The second group, maybe less apparent by some of the titles, is from the Hindu tradition, things attributed to Krishna. And I'm going to date myself now, but whenever I see the term yogi, I think of two things. Yogi Berra and Yogi Bear. And I have to stop and remind myself that a yogi is probably best understood as just a spiritual practitioner, somebody who's on the path, somebody who's trying to draw close to the divine. The third groupings are from the Buddha. And the last groupings are from the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu. And it's really interesting to see and ponder that of those four groups, Christian readings are the latest. That the other readings precede Christianity by at least, arguably, 500 years. Some as many as perhaps 3,000 years. And so what you have as the essence of these readings is a core human experience. I really like that allegory from the Golden Castle. I had the privilege of knowing John Julian. I haven't seen him for a number of years now. He actually lives in Waukesha. There's an Episcopal religious order called the Order of Julian of Norwich, and Father John Julian was the founder. He now lives as a hermit. He's retired in an apartment. So, you know, to me it's cushy hermitage, but that's okay. I wouldn't want to live in the cave either, you know. But isn't it true that we think if we're going to be spiritually achieved, I hate to say advance, but we think about that, advance, reach a spiritual goal, get to a spiritual plateau, that it's something extraordinary that we have to do. Some tremendous act of endurance, some tremendous act of courage and faith, and yet that particular story shows that all they did was raise food and give it to the poor, and their skin became golden. The evidence of spiritual achievement in that particular story. And they weren't even aware it was happening until someone else came along and said, "My, look at your skin." Things like love, compassion, freedom from attachment, which is really that notion that if I lose this, whatever this is, my house, my job, my pet, my partner, my foot, my mobility, my fancy new pen, it can be the most inane to the most significant thing in our lives, that if we lose that, somehow we cease to exist. I'm not speaking against commitment here. I'm not saying we should make each other disposable commodities that we can just cast aside when we no longer fit into our projection or our image of where we're going. But really, what is the enduring quality of each of us? Is it our good looks? They're going to fade. Is it the fact that we can run fast and play football and baseball and track? Because we're going to slow down. One of the most eye-opening experiences I ever had was in my late 20s. I umpired softball for 25 years, in my late 20s. As I moved into my early 30s, and it was in the town I grew up, and I saw these people who were starting to slow down. They were getting to 40, and they weren't as fast as they used to be, and they couldn't cope with it, and they became the biggest whiners you'd ever want to experience. And the stripes on their shorts that in high school went down the side now look like pleats down the front. And they couldn't, you could tell they couldn't admit that it's just time to buy a new pair of pants. Everything changes all the time. What stays constant? I think it's hopefully our ability to love, our ability to reach out to one another, our ability to ask for help, and our ability to realize that our world simply has to extend beyond me. That if I don't reach out to someone else, no matter my reason, I become pretty isolated, pretty self-important. I had a 96-year-old professor when I was at Marquette right after high school, still teaching. He said, "You know what's wrong with old people?" He said, "Your world starts to shrink." He obviously didn't consider himself an old person. He said, "You get confined to one room, and all of a sudden the littlest thing being out of place is the biggest deal in your life." I think the call to life is to resist the closing in, resist the isolation. We can really change somebody's world, even if we can't change the whole thing all at once. Don't leave afterwards. It's Lynette's birthday. She's 39.